What if everything you know about time is wrong? What if the very ticking of the clock, the passing of days, the steady march from past to future? What if all of it is just a construct? A useful illusion, yes, but one that hides something much deeper, something far stranger than we ever imagined. This video isn't just about time the way we think of it. It's about challenging everything you believe about reality itself. You see, for centuries, philosophers, scientists, and even poets have tried to answer the same question. What is time? Is it a real, measurable entity that exists outside of us? Or is it simply a framework we humans invented to make sense of the world around us? Why do we experience time so differently from one another? Why does it fly by when we're having fun, yet drag on forever in moments of boredom or pain? And here's where things get really strange. What if time could be manipulated? What if we could change how we experience it, or even travel through it? To answer these questions, we'll need to dive deep into both the physical and the philosophical worlds. Physics gives us one understanding of time. Einstein's theory of relativity, for instance, shattered our perception of time as a constant. But philosophy asks an even more fundamental question. Does time actually exist, or is it just a mental construct we use to organize our experiences? We'll also explore how different cultures perceive time. In the West, we see time as linear, moving forward in a straight line from the past, through the present, and into the future. But many cultures see time differently, as something cyclical, or even as something that flows in multiple directions at once. Throughout this video, we're going to take you on a journey across science, philosophy, culture, and technology. We'll examine the key scientific theories about time, from Newton's unchangeable clockwork universe to Einstein's flexible space-time continuum. But we'll also go beyond science, into the philosophical arguments that have divided thinkers for millennia. Is time even real? Or are we trapped inside an illusion of our own making? And, as we push forward into the future, we'll explore the wild possibilities that modern technology brings to the table: virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and the possibility of manipulating or even stopping time as we know it. What would that mean for our lives? What would it mean for our reality? So before we dive in, let me ask you this. What do you think time is? When you think of time, do you think of a ticking clock? Do you think of the days passing, of getting older, of moments slipping through your fingers? Or do you think of something more abstract? A force, a flow, a mystery? Because by the end of this video, you might find that time isn't what you thought it was at all. Introduction to time in physics. When we think of time, many of us picture a ticking clock or a calendar. Seconds, minutes, hours, days all moving forward in perfect sequence. For centuries, scientists believed this to be an accurate representation of time, constant, unchangeable, and universal. But in the 20th century, a revolutionary idea emerged, one that completely changed our understanding of time. That idea was Einstein's theory of relativity, and it shattered the long-held notion that time was the same for everyone, everywhere. Newton's clockwork universe. Before we dive into Einstein's revelations, let's first understand what came before. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds in the history of science, gave us a vision of the universe that was neat and orderly. In Newton's world, time was like a giant, universal clock. It ticked away uniformly and relentlessly, no matter where you were in the universe. According to Newton, time was absolute, an independent entity that existed outside of us, marching forward at the same rate for everyone. This clockwork universe was comforting. It was predictable. But as science progressed, cracks began to show in Newton's model of time. And those cracks would soon turn into a complete paradigm shift. Einstein's theory of relativity. In 1905, Albert Einstein introduced the world to his special theory of relativity. His ideas were revolutionary because they showed that time wasn't the rigid, unchanging thing we thought it was. In fact, time could stretch and bend depending on the speed at which an object was moving. According to Einstein, Time is relative. It changes depending on your frame of reference. If you're moving close to the speed of light, time actually slows down for you compared to someone standing still. This phenomenon, known as time dilation, has been proven in countless experiments, including with astronauts in space, who experience time slightly differently than we do on Earth. But it wasn't just speed that affected time. In his later work on general relativity, Einstein revealed that gravity also has the power to warp time. The stronger the gravitational field, the more time slows down. This is why time moves ever so slightly slower for someone standing at the base of a mountain compared to someone at the top. While these differences are minute in our everyday experience, they have profound implications for our understanding of the universe. Space-time, the fabric of reality. Einstein's ideas led to a profound conclusion. Time is not separate from space. Instead, they are interwoven into what physicists call the space-time continuum. In this model, time is treated as a dimension, just like the three dimensions of space. Together, space and time form the very fabric of reality. Objects with mass, like stars and planets, warp this fabric, bending both space and time. One of the most famous examples of this is the black hole. A black hole's gravitational pull is so intense that it bends space-time to the extreme. At the edge of a black hole, time slows down dramatically. If you were to watch someone fall into a black hole, you'd see them appear to slow down and eventually freeze in time. But for the person falling, time would feel completely normal until they reached the event horizon, where the laws of physics as we know them break down. The implications of relativity on time. So, what does all of this mean? For one, it means that time is not as simple as we once thought. It's flexible. It can stretch, bend, and even stop under certain conditions. This challenges our everyday understanding of time as something that just ticks away uniformly. In the grand scheme of the universe, time is far more complex and mysterious than we ever imagined. But here's the bigger question. If time can be bent, stretched, and manipulated by factors like speed and gravity, does that mean time itself is less of a fundamental reality and more of a consequence of these forces? This brings us to one of the greatest philosophical questions about time. Is time real, or is it simply a construct that emerges from the interactions of matter and energy? The flow of time in physics. In physics, we often talk about the arrow of time, the idea that time moves forward in one direction, from the past to the future. This seems to align with our everyday experience. We remember the past, we live in the present, and we anticipate the future. But in the laws of physics, there's nothing that inherently dictates that time must move in one direction. The fundamental equations of physics work just as well if time were to run backward. In theory, the universe could rewind, with broken eggs reassembling, and ice melting back into cubes. So, why do we experience time as moving forward? One explanation lies in the second law of thermodynamics, which tells us that entropy, or disorder, increases over time. This growing disorder gives us the experience of time moving forward. But again, this raises questions. Is the arrow of time just a result of increasing entropy, or is it something deeper? Time and quantum mechanics. No discussion of time in physics would be complete without mentioning quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that deals with the incredibly small particles and waves at the atomic and subatomic level. Quantum mechanics has some of the strangest implications for time, including the idea that particles can be in multiple places at once and that they can influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, in a phenomenon known as quantum entanglement. In the quantum world, time behaves in bizarre ways that challenge our classical understanding of the universe. Some physicists even suggest that at the quantum level, time might not exist at all. Instead, the universe could be a series of timeless snapshots, with the flow of time being something we experience only at a larger scale. If this is true, it would completely upend our understanding of reality. So, what have we learned about time from the realm of physics? At the cosmic scale, Time is anything but straightforward. It's not a constant, universal clock ticking the way for all of us equally. Instead, it's flexible, relative, and deeply intertwined with space. The nature of time is influenced by speed, gravity, and even the strange rules of quantum mechanics. Time may be far more fluid and far less real than we ever imagined. But while physics gives us these incredible insights into time's behavior in the universe, it leaves us with even deeper questions. If time is so malleable and subjective, is it truly a fundamental part of reality? Or is it simply a useful tool we use to make sense of the world around us? Introduction to Time in Philosophy. While physics provides us with an understanding of time as a dimension that bends and warps depending on the forces at play, philosophers have long wrestled with an even more profound question. Does time exist at all? For some, time is nothing more than a construct of the human mind, a way for us to organize our thoughts and experiences. For others, time is as real and fundamental as the world itself. Over the centuries, some of the greatest thinkers have debated the nature of time, and their ideas are as varied as they are fascinating. Ancient philosophical views. In ancient Greece, philosophers were already asking deep questions about time. Parmenides, a pre-Socratic philosopher, argued that change, and therefore time, was an illusion. He believed that reality was one unchanging, eternal thing. If time were real, he reasoned, then things would have to come into existence and then disappear, which he found impossible to reconcile with the idea of a continuous, unified reality. On the other hand, Heraclitus, another pre-Socratic thinker, argued that change was the fundamental nature of reality. He's famous for the saying, "You cannot step into the same river twice," meaning that everything is constantly in flux. To Heraclitus, time was intrinsic to the universe. It was a force that defined change and movement, making the flow of existence possible. Aristotle, one of the most influential philosophers in history, took a more moderate view. He saw time as a measurement of change. Time was not something that existed on its own, but rather something that emerged from the observation of motion and transformation in the world around us. Kant's revolutionary idea. Fast forward to the 18th century, and we meet Immanuel Kant, a philosopher whose ideas about time would profoundly influence the way we think about it today. Kant argued that time, and space, for that matter, are not external realities. Instead, they are forms of intuition, structures that the human mind imposes on our experiences. In other words, Kant believed that time didn't exist independently of us. We don't perceive time because it's out there in the world. Rather, we experience time because it's an essential way in which our minds make sense of the world. According to Kant, time is a necessary framework that allows us to perceive events in a sequence, to understand cause and effect, and to live in a world that seems to move from the past to the future. But this framework exists in the mind, not in the external world. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Another influential philosopher who grappled with the concept of time was Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence suggests that time is not linear, but cyclical. He proposed that the universe, and everything within it, repeats itself infinitely. Every event, every action, every moment happens again and again in an endless loop. Nietzsche didn't necessarily believe this was physically true, but he used the concept as a thought experiment. What if you had to live your life over and over again, with every decision and event repeating eternally? Would you choose to live your life differently? Would you embrace the repetition, or would it drive you mad? This idea challenges our typical view of time as something that moves in a straight line, from past to present to future. Instead, Nietzsche forces us to confront the possibility of time as a circle, endlessly looping back on itself. In a way, his idea echoes ancient cyclical views of time found in many cultures, which we'll explore later. Bergson's time as duration. In the early 20th century, the French philosopher Henri Bergson introduced a new way of thinking about time, one that contrasted with the mechanical, clock-driven conceptions of his day. Bergson argued that there are two kinds of time: measurable, quantitative time, the kind we track with clocks and calendars, and lived, qualitative time, the subjective experience of time passing. Bergson called this lived experience duration, a continuous flow that cannot be broken into discrete moments or measured in units. According to Bergson, real time is not a series of static, separate points, but a dynamic and fluid process. He believed that true time is what we experience in consciousness, a personal, subjective flow that cannot be captured by the mechanical ticking of a clock. Bergson's view challenges the notion that time is something external and objective. Instead, he emphasized the inner experience of time, the way it seems to speed up or slow down depending on our emotions, thoughts, and activities. This concept of time as duration resonates with many of our everyday experiences. Think about how time seems to drag on during a boring task, but flies by when you're engaged in something you love. For Bergson, this subjective experience was closer to the true nature of time. Presentism versus eternalism. One of the central debates in modern philosophy of time is between two opposing views: presentism and eternalism. Presentism holds that only the present moment is real. The past is gone, and the future hasn't happened yet, so they don't exist. According to presentists, reality is a constantly changing present, with each moment passing into nothingness as the next moment arrives. Eternalism, on the other hand, argues that all moments in time, past, present, and future, exist equally. In this view, time is like a landscape, with every moment existing simultaneously, even though we only experience it one slice at a time. Eternalists believe that just because we can't perceive the past or future doesn't mean they aren't real. Every moment from the birth of the universe to the distant future is equally real and equally existent. This debate raises profound questions about the nature of existence and our place in the universe. If only the present is real, then our lives are fleeting, and everything we know will soon be gone. But if eternalism is correct, then every moment of our lives exists forever, preserved in the fabric of time, even if we can't access it directly. Philosophical implications of time's existence. What does all of this mean for how we live our lives? If time is just a construct of the mind, as Kant suggested, does that make our experience of life any less real? If the past and future don't exist, as presentists believe, how should we think about our memories or our plans for the future? And if eternalism is true, does that mean every moment of joy and every moment of suffering is eternally preserved in the universe? These questions have haunted philosophers for centuries, and they continue to challenge us today. Time, it seems, is not just a backdrop for our lives. It's an integral part of how we understand the world, how we make decisions, and how we experience existence itself. Philosophers have approached time from many angles, offering us wildly different interpretations of what time is, or whether it exists at all. From Parmenides' belief that time is an allusion to Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, from Kant's theory of time as a mental construct to Bergson's emphasis on subjective duration, these philosophical perspectives remind us that time is far from a simple concept. Ultimately, the nature of time remains one of the greatest mysteries of human thought. Is time real, or is it simply a tool we use to make sense of our experiences? And does it even matter? Whether we view time as a constant flow, a cyclical pattern, or an illusion, it shapes every aspect of our lives. And perhaps, in that sense, time is as real as anything we can experience. Introduction to cultural perceptions. Time is something we all experience, but the way we perceive and understand it varies dramatically across cultures. Some cultures see time as a linear path, moving steadily from the past into the future. Others see time as cyclical, with the present endlessly returning to the past. This section explores how different societies around the world view time and how these perceptions shape everything from their daily lives to their philosophies and worldviews. Understanding time through a cultural lens reveals something important. Time is not just a scientific concept or a philosophical puzzle. It is also a social construct shaped by the values, beliefs, and needs of each culture. Linear time, the Western perspective. In much of the Western world, time is typically seen as linear. We think of life as a straight line, beginning with birth, moving through childhood, adulthood, and old age, and ending in death. History, too, is viewed as a progression from the past to the present, with the future waiting ahead. This linear view of time has deep roots in both Western philosophy and religion. Christianity, for example, introduced the concept of time as having a definite beginning and an ultimate end. The Bible begins with the creation of the world and looks forward to the final judgment, reinforcing the idea that time is a journey with a clear start and a predetermined conclusion. This religious narrative has influenced Western thinking for centuries, cementing the idea that time is something that moves forward, with no going back. In the modern era, this view of time has become even more ingrained. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism brought with them a heightened focus on efficiency, productivity, and progress. Time became money, and the relentless march of progress meant that there was always a future to plan for, a next step to take, a goal to achieve. Time, in this view, is a resource to be managed, a path to be followed. Cyclical time, indigenous and Eastern perspectives. In contrast, many non-Western cultures view time as cyclical. For these cultures, time is not a straight line but a repeating circle, with the present constantly cycling back into the past. This cyclical view of time is common in many indigenous cultures, as well as in Eastern philosophies and religions. Take, for example, Hinduism and Buddhism, which see time as an endless cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth. In Hindu cosmology, the universe goes through repeating cycles called yugas, each lasting millions of years. These cycles of time repeat over and over, with no definitive beginning or end. Similarly, in Buddhism, the cycle of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, reflects a view of time as a continuous loop rather than a linear progression. In many indigenous cultures, time is also seen as cyclical. For example, the Hopi people of North America view time not as a linear path, but as a repeating cycle, with events from the past influencing the present and future. For the Hopi, time is not something that marches forward relentlessly. Instead, it is something that flows in a circle, connecting all aspects of life in a continuous loop. This cyclical view of time often leads to a greater emphasis on living in harmony with the natural world. Since time repeats, there is less pressure to constantly push forward toward the future. Instead, the focus is on maintaining balance and honoring the cycles of nature, seasons, harvests, births, and deaths, all of which are seen as part of a natural, repeating order. The role of language in shaping time perception. It's not just cultural beliefs that shape how we understand time. Language plays a powerful role as well. Different languages structure time in different ways, and this, in turn, shapes how speakers of those languages experience and think about time. For example, in English and many other Western languages, time is often described in spatial terms. We talk about the future ahead of us and the past behind us, as if time were a road we are walking down. This reinforces the linear view of time, progressing forward through life, with the past receding into the distance. But in some other languages, time is conceptualized very differently. The Aymara people of South America, for example, have a unique way of talking about time. In their language, the past is described as being in front of them, while the future is behind them. This reflects their view that the past is something known and visible, while the future is unknown and hidden, literally out of sight. In Aymara culture, this leads to a more reflective approach to time, with a greater emphasis on learning from the past rather than obsessing over the future. Similarly, in Mandarin Chinese, time is not always framed in terms of front and back, but rather up and down. The word for last, as in last week, is associated with the character for up, while the word for next, as in next week, is associated with the character for down. This vertical representation of time influences how Chinese speakers think about the flow of events, less like a straight line and more like an unfolding ladder of moments. These linguistic differences show that time is not just a universal experience. It is shaped by the words we use to describe it. The structure of language can change how we perceive time, whether we see it as something to move through, climb, or reflect upon. Industrial versus indigenous time. The industrialized world's obsession with efficiency and productivity has led to a view of time as a commodity, something that can be saved, wasted, or spent. This is often called clock time, where the day is divided into fixed hours, minutes, and seconds, all neatly tracked and scheduled. Indigenous communities, on the other hand, often operate on what's called event time. Instead of focusing on the clock, they measure time by the natural flow of events. For example, instead of scheduling a meeting for 3:00 p.m., an indigenous community might plan to meet when the sun is high or after the first snowfall. Time, in this sense, is fluid and adaptable, responding to the rhythms of nature rather than the rigid ticking of a clock. This difference between clock time and event time reflects a broader contrast in worldview. Industrial societies prioritize efficiency, productivity, and progress, constantly looking toward the future and the next goal. In contrast, indigenous communities often emphasize living in harmony with the environment and valuing the present moment. Time, for them, is not a race but a cycle, something to be lived rather than measured. The influence of time perception on daily life. These different cultural perceptions of time influence not only philosophical views, but also how people structure their daily lives. In cultures with a linear view of time, there is often a focus on deadlines, schedules, and planning for the future. Time is something to be managed and controlled. This can lead to a fast-paced, goal-oriented lifestyle where success is measured by productivity and future achievements. In contrast, cultures with a more cyclical or fluid view of time tend to place less emphasis on strict schedules and more on the present moment. Life is not always about rushing to the next thing. It's about experiencing each moment fully. This can lead to a more relaxed, present-focused way of life, where people prioritize relationships, community, and connection with nature over constant forward motion. For example, in many parts of the world, especially in industrialized nations, time anxiety is a common experience. People feel pressured to constantly be doing something productive, to always be moving forward and achieving more. But in cultures with a cyclical view of time, this kind of anxiety is less common. There is less urgency to beat the clock, and more emphasis on accepting the natural flow of time as it comes. Modern globalization and the clash of time perceptions. As the world becomes more globalized, these different perceptions of time often come into conflict. In business, for example, Western cultures that prioritize punctuality and strict deadlines may clash with cultures that have a more relaxed approach to time. What seems like efficiency to one group might feel like impatience to another. Conversely, what seems like mindfulness to one group might feel like inefficiency to another. As we move toward a more interconnected world, understanding these cultural differences in how we perceive and value time becomes increasingly important. It's not just about respecting other people's schedules. It's about recognizing that our understanding of time is deeply rooted in our history, our beliefs, and our worldview. The cultural shaping of time. Time is not just a universal ticking clock. It is a cultural construct shaped by the stories, beliefs, and languages of the societies we live in. From the linear time of the industrial West to the cyclical time of indigenous and Eastern cultures, the way we experience time profoundly shapes how we live our lives. The next time you find yourself racing against the clock or watching the minutes tick by, take a moment to reflect. What is time to you? Is it something to be controlled and managed, or is it something to be lived and experienced? And remember, there are countless ways to understand time. each offering a different perspective on what it means to exist in this ever-changing world. Introduction to the question of time's existence. Time. It's something we all experience. We wake up to it, we measure our days by it, and we organize our entire lives around it. But what if time, as we understand it, doesn't exist at all? What if the flow of time, the separation of past, present, and future, is just a convenient illusion? For centuries, philosophers have debated whether time is real or simply a construct of human perception. In this section, we'll dive into one of the most profound questions in both philosophy and science. Does time really exist? Presentism versus eternalism. Two opposing views. One of the central debates in the philosophy of time is between two competing theories, presentism and eternalism. These two views offer radically different perspectives on what is real and how we should understand the nature of time. Presentism, as we mentioned earlier, holds that only the present exists. The past is gone, and the future has not yet arrived, meaning that only the present moment is real. According to presentists, time is like a spotlight, illuminating only the moment we are currently experiencing. Once that moment passes, it ceases to exist. On the other hand, eternalism proposes that all points in time, past, present, and future, exist equally. In this view, time is more like a landscape, with every moment in history existing simultaneously. We only experience one moment at a time, but that doesn't mean the other moments don't exist. This view suggests that time is like space, where different locations coexist even if we can't be in all of them at once. These two views lead to very different interpretations of reality. If presentism is true, then the past and future are essentially illusions. But if eternalism is correct, then everything that has ever happened or will happen exists simultaneously, even if we can't perceive it. The block universe, a scientific perspective on eternalism. Eternalism aligns closely with a theory in physics known as the block universe. In this model, time is seen as a fourth dimension, much like the three spatial dimensions of height, width, and depth. According to the block universe theory, the past, present, and future all exist together in a static block, with time simply being the direction in which we move through this block. In a block universe, time doesn't flow in the way we experience it. Instead, every moment in time already exists, and our perception of moving through time is just that, a perception. This theory fits well with Einstein's theory of relativity, which suggests that time is not absolute but depends on the observer's frame of reference. In relativity, different observers can experience different flows of time, depending on their speed and proximity to massive objects. In a block universe, this variability is simply a reflection of the different ways we move through the same static block of time. The illusion of the flow of time. The block universe raises a troubling question. If time doesn't flow, why do we feel like it does? Our everyday experience tells us that time is constantly moving forward. We remember the past, we experience the present, and we anticipate the future. This perception of time's flow seems fundamental to our experience of the world. Philosophers who argue that time is an illusion suggest that this flow is not real. It's a mental construct. Our brains are wired to organize our experiences in a sequence, creating the impression that time is moving forward. But just because we experience time this way doesn't mean that time itself is actually flowing. Think of a film reel. Each frame of the film exists all at once, but when we play the movie, we experience the sequence of events as if they are unfolding in real time. Our experience of time might work in a similar way. The past, present, and future all exist, but we experience them in sequence because of how our minds are structured. The argument from physics, time as an emergent property. Another argument against the existence of time comes from modern physics, specifically from the field of quantum mechanics and theories of quantum gravity. Some physicists propose that time may not be a fundamental property of the universe, but an emergent one, something that arises from deeper, more fundamental processes. In this view, time doesn't exist at the most basic level of reality. Instead, it emerges from the interactions of particles, fields, and forces. Just as temperature is not a fundamental property but a statistical measure of the motion of particles, time might be a way of organizing events that emerge from more fundamental processes in the universe. This theory is still in its early stages, but it suggests that what we perceive as time could be a byproduct of more basic, timeless physical laws. If true, this would mean that time, as we understand it, does not exist at the most fundamental level of reality. Philosophical challenges to the existence of time. From a philosophical standpoint, the argument that time is an illusion has a long history. The ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides, whom we mentioned earlier, argued that all change is an illusion, and therefore time must also be an illusion. He believed that reality is one unchanging, eternal thing, and that our perception of time is a trick played on us by our senses. More recently, philosophers like J.M.E. McTaggart have advanced similar arguments. McTaggart famously argued that time is unreal in a 1908 paper titled The Unreality of Time. His argument is based on what he called the A series and B series of time. The A series represents our experience of time as a flow, where events move from the future to the present to the past. The B series, on the other hand, is a more static view, where events are ordered in relation to one another, but there is no objective present. McTaggart argued that the A series is necessary for time to be real, but that the A series is contradictory and illogical. Therefore, he concluded, time cannot be real. His argument is highly complex, but it has had a lasting impact on the philosophy of time, prompting many to question whether our experience of time reflects the true nature of reality. Presentism's counterargument: the reality of the present. Despite these challenges, presentism has strong defenders in both philosophy and science. Presentists argue that our direct experience of the present is evidence enough that time is real. We live in the present moment. We make decisions that affect the future, and we remember events from the past. These experiences are tangible and undeniable. For presentists, the idea that the past and future exist simultaneously with the present is deeply counterintuitive. After all, we can't access the past or the future. We can only live in the present. From this perspective, time is not an illusion but a fundamental part of the way reality unfolds. The psychological reality of time. Even if time is not real in the physical sense, it may still be real in a psychological sense. Our experience of time is deeply tied to our perception of life, identity, and existence. Time gives structure to our memories and allows us to plan for the future. It's the framework within which we make sense of our lives. Some philosophers argue that even if time doesn't exist independently of human consciousness, it's still real because it shapes our experiences and decisions. In this sense, time may be a construct of the mind, but that doesn't make it any less real to us. After all, many aspects of human life, like emotions, relationships, and meaning, are constructs, but they are no less important for being so. The ethical implications of time's non-existence. If time is not real, what does that mean for how we live our lives? If the past and future don't exist, should we focus solely on the present moment? Philosophical traditions like Buddhism have long advocated for living in the present, arguing that attachment to the past and future causes suffering. In this sense, the idea that time is an illusion can be liberating. It encourages us to let go of our anxieties about the future and our regrets about the past, and to live fully in the present. But eternalism also has ethical implications. If all moments in time exist equally, then every decision we make is preserved in the fabric of reality forever. This can lead to a sense of responsibility, knowing that every action we take has a permanent place in the universe. Does time really exist? So, does time really exist? The answer, it seems, depends on how we choose to approach the question. From a physical perspective, time may be an emergent property, or it may be woven into the fabric of space-time. From a philosophical standpoint, Time could be an illusion created by our perception of change, or it could be a fundamental aspect of reality. And from a psychological perspective, time is very real. It's how we structure our lives and understand our experiences. In the end, whether or not time is real, it remains one of the most profound and mysterious concepts in human thought. Our experience of time shapes everything we do, from our memories to our hopes for the future. And even if time is just a construct, it is one that we cannot escape. Introduction to time in the human mind. If time is such a fundamental part of our lives, why do we all experience it so differently? Have you ever noticed how time seems to fly by when you're having fun but drags endlessly when you're stuck in a boring meeting? Or how some moments in life feel eternal, while others seem to slip away in an instant? The way we perceive time is highly subjective, influenced by everything from our emotions to our age and even our state of mind. In this section, we'll explore the psychological perception of time, how the mind shapes our experience of time, and how time, in turn, affects our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. How we perceive time. The basics. At its core, time perception is the way we mentally track the passage of time. But this process is anything but simple. Our brains don't have a built-in clock that ticks off seconds, minutes, and hours like a machine. Instead, our perception of time is shaped by a variety of cognitive processes, including attention, memory, and emotion. This means that our experience of time can be incredibly fluid, changing depending on what we're doing, how we're feeling, and even how old we are. Research shows that our perception of time is influenced by many factors. When we're highly focused on a task, time can seem to fly by because we're not constantly checking the clock. Conversely, when we're bored or waiting for something to happen, time drags on because our brains are more aware of each passing second. In this way, time perception is deeply linked to our cognitive state. It's not just about what's happening around us, but also about what's happening inside our minds. Time dilation. Why time flies when you're having fun. One of the most well-known psychological phenomena related to time perception is time dilation, the idea that time seems to move more slowly or quickly depending on our emotional state. When we're engaged in something exciting or enjoyable, time often feels like it's moving faster. This is because our brains are focused on the activity itself, rather than on the passage of time. We become so absorbed in what we're doing that we don't notice the minutes ticking by. This phenomenon has been studied extensively by psychologists. One common explanation is that when we're highly engaged in an activity, our brains are processing a lot of new information, which makes time seem to pass more quickly. On the flip side, when we're bored or disinterested, our brains aren't as stimulated, and we become more aware of time dragging on. This is also why time seems to slow down during moments of fear or stress. In dangerous or high-pressure situations, our brains go into overdrive, processing every detail of our surroundings to help us survive. This heightened state of awareness can make it feel like time is stretching out, as our brains take in more information than usual. The role of attention in time perception. Attention plays a crucial role in how we perceive time. When we're focused on something, we tend to lose track of time because our attention is fully absorbed by the task at hand. This is why activities that require intense concentration, like playing a musical instrument or solving a complex puzzle, can make hours feel like minutes. Psychologists refer to this state of deep focus as flow, a term popularized by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. When we're in a flow state, we're so immersed in what we're doing that we lose all sense of time. On the other hand, when our attention is divided, or we're constantly distracted, time can feel slower. For example, when you're sitting in a classroom or a meeting that doesn't hold your interest, you're likely to check the clock frequently, which makes time feel like it's moving at a crawl. In this case, your attention isn't fully engaged, so you become more aware of the passage of time. Memory and time. Why the past feels different. Our perception of time is also deeply tied to our memory. Have you ever noticed how the weeks and months of a busy year seem to blur together, while specific events or moments stand out vividly? This is because our brains don't store memories of every passing second. Instead, we remember events that are significant or emotionally charged. Interestingly, this also explains why time seems to speed up as we get older. When we're children, everything is new, and our brains are constantly processing new experiences. These new experiences create rich, detailed memories, which make time feel slower in retrospect. But as we grow older and our lives become more routine, our brains have fewer new experiences to record. As a result, the years seem to pass by more quickly because we have fewer distinct memories to mark the passage of time. This phenomenon is known as the reminiscence bump, and it helps explain why older people often feel like their childhood and early adulthood were filled with more vivid memories than their later years. The newness of these early experiences creates a sense of richness and fullness, which makes time seem slower. Emotional states and time perception. Our emotions also play a powerful role in shaping how we perceive time. Studies show that when we're feeling happy, excited, or engaged, time seems to move faster. But when we're sad, anxious, or bored, time drags on. This is why waiting for something, whether it's a bus, a job interview, or a special event, can feel agonizingly slow. The emotional discomfort of waiting makes us more aware of every passing moment. Interestingly, time perception can also be altered by emotional extremes. During traumatic or life-threatening situations, many people report experiencing time in slow motion. This phenomenon, known as time slowing, is believed to be a survival mechanism. In moments of extreme stress, our brains switch into high gear, processing more information than usual to help us react to danger. This heightened awareness can make time seem to stretch out, giving us more time to respond. The aging brain and the speed of time. As we age, our perception of time changes. When we're children, the days seem to stretch on forever. Summers last an eternity, and waiting for our birthday feels like it takes years. But as we grow older, time seems to speed up. Weeks fly by, months seem to blur together, and before we know it, another year has passed. One explanation for this phenomenon has to do with how our brains process time. When we're young, everything is new. Our brains are constantly taking in fresh experiences, which makes time feel slower because we're processing so much new information. But as we age and become more familiar with the world, our brains don't need to work as hard to process routine experiences, making time feel like it's moving faster. Another explanation has to do with proportionality. When you're 5 years old, a year is 20% of your life, so it feels like a long time. But when you're 50, a year is only 2% of your life, so it feels much shorter by comparison. This proportional effect can make time seem to accelerate as we age, with each passing year feeling shorter than the last. Time and mindfulness. Slowing down the clock. Despite the subjective nature of time, there are ways to influence how we perceive it. One powerful tool is mindfulness, the practice of paying close attention to the present moment. When we practice mindfulness, we focus our awareness on our current experiences, without getting caught up in thoughts about the past or future. This heightened awareness can make time feel richer and fuller, as we become more attuned to the details of the present moment. Research shows that mindfulness can help slow down our perception of time, allowing us to feel more present and engaged in our lives. By focusing on the here and now, we can counteract the feeling of time slipping away and create a greater sense of balance and calm. The role of culture in shaping time perception. As we explored earlier, different cultures have different ways of perceiving and valuing time. These cultural attitudes toward time also influence how individuals within those cultures experience it. In fast-paced, industrialized societies, time is often seen as a commodity, something that can be saved, spent, or wasted. This creates a sense of urgency, where people feel pressured to make the most of their time, often leading to time anxiety. In contrast, cultures that place a greater emphasis on the present moment or view time as cyclical tend to experience less time-related stress. In these cultures, there is less focus on rushing from one activity to the next and more emphasis on living in harmony with the natural rhythms of life. This cultural difference in time perception can lead to a greater sense of peace and contentment, as individuals feel less pressure to constantly manage or control their time. Time is a construct of the mind. Ultimately, our perception of time is not fixed. It's fluid, shaped by our emotions, attention, and cognitive processes. While time may be measured by clocks and calendars, our experience of it is deeply subjective, influenced by everything from our mental state to our age and cultural background. So, the next time you find yourself thinking that time is flying by or dragging endlessly, remember that your perception of time is not set in stone. It's shaped by your mind, your emotions, and the way you choose to focus your attention. And while we may never fully understand the nature of time, we can learn to shape our experience of it, finding ways to slow down, savor the present, and live more fully in the moments we're given. Introduction to Time Manipulation. Time, as we've explored, is a mysterious and elusive concept. For centuries, we've understood it as something fixed, uncontrollable, unchangeable. But what if technology could change that? What if we could manipulate time, stretch it, condense it, or even reverse it? Advances in technology, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and quantum physics, are opening up possibilities that once seemed like science fiction. In this section, we'll explore the emerging technologies that might allow us to manipulate time, and we'll examine the profound implications of doing so. Virtual reality. Bending time perception. Virtual reality, VR, is one of the most exciting technologies when it comes to altering our perception of time. In a VR environment, the laws of time and space as we know them can be completely rewritten. For example, a VR experience can be designed to make time seem to slow down or speed up, depending on the pace and structure of the simulation. Imagine playing a VR game where a single second in the real world feels like a minute inside the simulation. This ability to manipulate time perception opens up all kinds of possibilities, from training environments where users can practice skills in extended time, to entertainment experiences that play with time in ways that would be impossible in the physical world. One of the most fascinating aspects of VR is how it affects our brains. Studies show that when we're immersed in a virtual environment, our perception of time can be significantly altered. Because our brains are fully engaged in the simulated world, we lose track of the passage of time in the real world. This phenomenon, known as time compression, is similar to the flow state we discussed earlier, but it can be artificially induced through technology. In the future, it's possible that VR could be used to create environments where time moves differently than it does in the real world. Imagine a virtual classroom where students can spend hours learning and practicing skills, while only minutes pass in the physical world. Or consider the possibility of virtual vacations that allow you to spend a week relaxing on a beach in just a few hours of real-world time. Artificial intelligence and time efficiency. Artificial intelligence, AI, is already transforming how we manage and use time. By automating tasks and optimizing processes, AI allows us to accomplish more in less time, effectively compressing time in our daily lives. But the potential for AI to manipulate time goes far beyond simple efficiency gains. In the future, AI could help us manipulate time in more profound ways. For example, AI systems could predict future events with increasing accuracy, giving us the ability to anticipate and prepare for what's to come. This could fundamentally change how we think about the future and how we use our time. Imagine being able to predict the outcomes of decisions with such precision that we can see into the future, allowing us to avoid mistakes and optimize our use of time. Another possibility is the creation of AI systems that can speed up our cognitive processes. With neural interfaces and advanced AI, We could potentially think and learn much faster than we do now, effectively increasing the speed at which we process information. This could compress years of learning into months or even weeks, drastically altering the pace at which we move through life. Time dilation in space travel. The idea of time manipulation becomes even more intriguing when we look at the potential for space travel. Thanks to Einstein's theory of relativity, we know that time moves differently depending on how fast you're traveling and how close you are to a massive object like a planet or star. This phenomenon, known as time dilation, has been observed in astronauts who spend time in orbit. Because they're moving at high speeds, time passes slightly slower for them than it does for people on Earth. But time dilation becomes even more pronounced at near-light speeds. If we were able to build spacecraft that could travel close to the speed of light, time for the passengers on board would slow down dramatically compared to those left behind on Earth. This means that an astronaut on a long space journey might only age a few years, while decades could pass back on Earth. This kind of time manipulation has fascinating implications for space exploration and human life. It raises questions about the future of interstellar travel. Could humans one day travel to distant stars, effectively skipping hundreds or thousands of years of Earth's history while they remain relatively young? And if so, what would that mean for our understanding of time and life itself? Time travel, fiction or future reality? When we think about time manipulation, one of the most tantalizing possibilities is time travel. The idea of being able to travel backward or forward in time has been a staple of science fiction for decades, but is there any scientific basis for it? Could we one day build machines that allow us to travel through time? According to the laws of physics, time travel might not be as far-fetched as it seems. Einstein's theory of relativity allows for the possibility of closed time-like curves, which are paths in space-time that loop back on themselves, theoretically allowing an object to return to a point in the past. Some physicists believe that wormholes, shortcuts through space-time, could provide a way to travel between different points in time. However, there are significant challenges to making time travel a reality. One of the biggest obstacles is the so-called grandfather paradox, which asks, what happens if you travel back in time and change something, like preventing your own grandfather from meeting your grandmother? This would create a paradox where you could never have been born to go back in time in the first place. Despite these challenges, some scientists believe that time travel could be possible under certain conditions, especially if we can find a way to manipulate the fabric of space-time itself. Whether or not we'll ever achieve true time travel remains an open question, but the fact that it's even theoretically possible suggests that our understanding of time is far from complete. The ethics of time manipulation. As we move closer to a future where time manipulation becomes possible, we must also consider the ethical implications. If technology allows us to slow down, speed up, or even reverse time, how should we use this power? What responsibilities come with the ability to control something as fundamental as time? One ethical question revolves around the potential for inequality. If only a select few have access to technologies that allow them to manipulate time, it could create new forms of social and economic inequality. For example, imagine a world where the wealthy can afford to slow down time, giving them more hours in the day to work, learn, and enjoy life, while others are stuck in the ordinary flow of time. This could lead to a widening gap between those who have the ability to control time and those who don't. There are also deeper philosophical questions about how time manipulation could change our sense of meaning and purpose. If we can extend our lives by slowing down time or even travel back to relive moments, how would that affect our relationships, our goals, and our understanding of mortality? Would we lose the urgency that gives life meaning, or would we gain new perspectives on what it means to live fully? Time in virtual worlds. Living outside real time. As virtual worlds become more sophisticated, the lines between real and virtual time are beginning to blur. In a virtual environment, time doesn't have to follow the same rules as it does in the physical world. This opens up the possibility of living in virtual worlds where time moves at a different pace, or where time doesn't exist at all. For example, in virtual worlds, people could potentially live out entire lifetimes in a matter of minutes in the real world. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of reality and the relationship between time and experience. If someone spends years in a virtual world, experiencing all the joys and sorrows of a lifetime, does that experience count as real? And how do those experiences shape their perception of time in the physical world? As virtual reality technology continues to advance, it's possible that we'll see the creation of entire virtual societies where time flows differently than it does in the real world. This could lead to a future where people live out multiple lifetimes in different realities, with each experience shaped by a different understanding of time. The future of time. What's next? So, what does the future hold for time manipulation? As technology continues to advance, it's likely that we'll see new ways to control and experience time that we can't even imagine today. From neural interfaces that speed up our cognitive processes to quantum computers that allow us to predict future events, the possibilities are endless. But with these new capabilities come new challenges. As we gain more control over time, we'll need to rethink our relationship with it. What will it mean to live in a world where time is no longer a fixed, unchangeable force? How will we define success, happiness, and purpose in a future where time can be manipulated at will? Ultimately, the question of time manipulation is not just a technological one, it's a philosophical one. As we explore new ways to bend and reshape time, we'll need to consider what time means to us, both as individuals and as a society. The power of time. Time is one of the most fundamental aspects of our existence. It shapes our lives, our relationships, and our understanding of the world. But as technology continues to evolve, our ability to manipulate time is becoming more than just a thought experiment. It's becoming a real possibility. Whether through virtual reality, artificial intelligence, or advances in space travel, we are on the verge of a new era where time may no longer be something we simply observe. It could become something we control. As we move into this future, we must be mindful of the ethical and philosophical implications of time manipulation. After all, time is not just a resource, it's the very fabric of our existence. Recap of key points. Time. It's something we've tried to measure, define, and understand for millennia. Yet it remains one of the greatest mysteries of human existence. Over the course of this video, we've explored time from every angle, through the lenses of physics, philosophy, culture, psychology, and technology. We began by looking at time through the eyes of physics, from Newton's absolute time to Einstein's flexible space-time continuum. We learned that time isn't as constant or straightforward as we once thought. In fact, time can bend, stretch, and even stop under the right conditions, leading us to question whether time is a fundamental part of reality or simply a consequence of the forces around us. From there, we delved into the world of philosophy, where thinkers like Kant, Nietzsche, and Bergson offered radically different perspectives on time's existence and its role in our lives. Is time just a construct of the human mind, or is it as real as the physical objects around us? And if it is a construct, what does that mean for how we live our lives? Next, we explored how different cultures perceive time. From the linear time of the industrialized West to the cyclical time of indigenous and Eastern cultures, we saw that time isn't just a scientific or philosophical concept. It's also deeply influenced by our cultural values, languages, and ways of life. We then turned to the question of whether time really exists, diving into the debates between presentism and eternalism, as well as the concept of the block universe. In this view, time may not flow at all. Instead, every moment may exist simultaneously, preserved in the fabric of reality. And finally, we examined how our psychological perception of time changes depending on our emotions, attention, and experiences. We learned why time seems to fly when we're having fun, why it drags during moments of boredom, and how our memories shape our experience of time as we age. The unsolved mystery of time. Despite all of these insights, one thing remains clear. Time is still a mystery. Even with all of our scientific advancements and philosophical debates, we are no closer to fully understanding what time is. Is it real? Is it an illusion? Or is it something entirely beyond our comprehension? Perhaps time is one of those concepts that will always remain elusive, something we can never fully grasp because we're trapped within it. After all, we can't step outside of time to observe it objectively. We live inside the flow of time, experiencing it moment by moment, second by second, without ever truly understanding what it is. But maybe that's the beauty of time. Perhaps its mystery is what makes life so rich, so meaningful. Without time, we wouldn't have the experiences, memories, or aspirations that make us who we are. Time shapes our lives, and in return, we shape our understanding of it. Implications for technology and the future. As we move into the future, the mystery of time only deepens. Technology is rapidly advancing, giving us new ways to manipulate and experience time. From virtual reality that bends our perception of time to artificial intelligence that promises to make us more efficient, we are on the verge of a new era where time might become something we can control. And as we've discussed, the implications of these technologies are profound. But even as we gain the power to manipulate time, we must remember that time is not just a resource to be controlled. It's the fabric of our existence, the framework within which we live our lives. As we explore new ways to bend and reshape time, we should be mindful of how these changes will affect our sense of meaning, purpose, and connection to the world around us. A personal reflection on time. In the end, time is deeply personal. Each of us experiences it differently, and each of us has our own relationship with it. For some, time is a precious commodity, something to be managed carefully. For others, time is a mystery to be embraced, a reminder of the fleeting, fragile nature of life. So, what is time to you? Is it a resource, a mystery, a force that shapes your life? Do you feel like time is slipping away, or do you savor each moment as it comes? As we've seen, there's no single answer to the question of what time is. But perhaps that's the point. Time is something we all live with, something we all experience, but something we may never fully understand. As we wrap up this exploration of time, I encourage you to keep thinking about your own relationship with time. What does it mean to you? How does it shape your life? And how might the way you think about time change the way you live? In the words of the Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius, time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by and another takes its place, and this too will be swept away. Time is always moving, always changing, but within that movement lies the essence of life itself. So, if this exploration made you think differently about time, if it challenged your assumptions or opened your mind to new possibilities, I invite you to continue the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how you experience time. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that dives deep into life's biggest questions. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the philosophy of time. And remember, no matter how much we try to understand it, time remains one of the greatest mysteries of our existence.